Today, our interviewee for the Apex is Dylan Miles, a lifelong enthusiast and someone that has worked at both the pinnacle of classic car auctions as well as the very top of classic car dealers. Then in 2017, he became one of the latter category himself, setting up his own business dealing in sporting and classic automobiles. We're going to talk today a bit about how he got into the automotive world, our shared passion for Aston Martins, and hopefully hear a story or two from his progression through the echelons of the historic motoring world. Dylan, thank you so much for joining us, and let's begin.
Thank you, Charles.
You were brought up around classic bikes and cars. Can you tell us about your first automotive memories?
Well, they started pretty early on. I mean, my first word, believe it or not, was actually car, which, that kind of shows how far back it goes, really. And I was talking to my grandma the other day, and she said it was ridiculous. Whenever she'd take us out, we walked down the street, I'd have to stop and look at every single car, and she said it drove her mad. But so it's been something that's been in my life from day one, really. I mean, my dad has restored vintage motorcycles, and particularly Brough Superiors, for over 40 years, and collected cars. So as soon as I was born, I was immediately kind of surrounded by a wealth of books and cars and bikes and just every way you can imagine. And so it was really kind of something that started from the word go, really.
Fantastic. I know that we've both been fortunate enough to be exposed to Aston Martins growing up. Indeed, you currently have my father's old DB4 Series 5 Vantage for sale, a car which brings back many great memories for me. Was there a particular car that really kicked off your passion? And does that car still elicit the same excitement today?
I'm extremely lucky, as you are. My father has had Astons for a long time, and the car which I guess means the most to me and is that car, the equivalent of that car, is our DB5 convertible. So my dad bought the story goes back even further, actually. So it's a 1964 DB5 convertible, which was actually the London Motor Show car. So it was on the stand at Earl's Court in 1964. And my dad went to the motor show with his father, who wasn't really interested in cars, but just sort of, just took him out for the day, basically. And there on the stand was this white DB5 convertible. And my dad was 9 years old. And he sort of stood there. And at that time, of course, Bond had just been released, and there was a lot of excitement around Astons and DB5s, and he vowed one day to own one. And that wasn't actually the first car he owned, but in 1985, he was able to buy that car via a company called the Autodrome, which no longer exists. It's quite an interesting character. And Dad bought the car, and he still has it today. So, I've been extremely lucky to grow up with that car, and I've got incredible amount of memories of being a kid in it and kind of going, being excited, going to places with my dad and him driving, and sort of hoping, looking up, thinking one day I'm going to get to drive this car. And now I use it, probably quite a bit more than he does. That means an awful lot. I mean, to me, that's a very special car, and it's something that I would never, we have never any intention of selling, because it's still a very usable thing. We still get, every time I get in the car, it makes me feel good. It's just something it's almost, well, it is part of our family, actually. It is part of our family. My sisters love going in it. My mum loves going in it. Everybody loves it. And that's quite a special thing.
Yeah. I think that really summarizes why these classic cars become such an integral part of people's lives, and why so many people are completely passionate about them, like ourselves. Do you think you can get that connection to a modern car, as opposed to obviously classic cars? You can.
I think over time you probably could. It depends on what your tastes are. I mean, everybody's different. Some people hate old cars and they'll only buy the latest modern supercar. Other people are the opposite. But I think it's that connection only comes with time and memories and experiences, right? So, yes, you could have it with a modern car, but you'd have to own it for a decent period of time to allow yourself to have those experiences. I think that's what's special about these things, is the memories of places you've been to or journeys you've been on. It's all part of that. That's kind of it's the journey, really. And I think that's obviously, if you've got a brand new car, you won't have that, because you just won't have had the time to do the journeys and build up that kind of relationship with it. But yeah, I do think it's possible. I mean, it's just a time thing.
Yeah. And did you always know you wanted to go into the automotive world professionally? And how did that first come about?
Pretty much, yeah. I don't think there was really anything else that I was likely to do. I mean, I wasted a bit of time at university pretending to study law, but in reality, that was just it was pointless really. And I think I was about just under 2 years in, and I got a call from Coys saying, "Would you like a job in the showroom?" And I packed the whole thing in about 3 days. I think I got on the train, went up to see Coys, and they offered me a job on the spot. I took it and came back and handed my notice in at uni, and that was that. So yeah, it was always something that it's just because I live and breathe it. It's a world that I understand. I don't ever get bored of it. I mean, there are days where it's challenging. There's no doubt about that, but that sort of adds to the fun of it. But yeah, it was always something that was destined really for me to do.
Yep. And I guess your experience since then, you've obviously worked with some of the best in auction houses. You mentioned Coys, which is sadly no more, but RM Sotheby's, you spent some time there. And also you've obviously worked at some of the top classic car dealers, so Fiskins, Autosport Designs, and now sadly defunct JD Classics as well. Having seen both sides of the world, what do you think people should consider when they're deciding whether to buy or sell a car, either at auction or through a dealer?
I think it depends on the car, because there are certain types of cars which seem to do really well at auctions that don't sell as well with dealers. And there are certain types of cars that don't do well at auction and do so well with dealers. Now, a case in point actually is that Astons in general are better suited to being sold via dealers than they are at auctions. If you look at the auction results overall for Aston Martins, they're generally less than dealer prices. Now, there's a few reasons for that, I think, but I would say it depends on the type of car, because, if you're, for instance, sticking with the Aston theme, those who want to buy an old Aston have probably thought about it for a while. It's a car they've always wanted to own. They want to take their time to buy one, and they want to have the experience of acquiring the car is part of the fun of it, really. Now, at an auction, it is an exciting experience, obviously, but it only lasts for that the lot comes up and you're bidding, and within 2 or 3 minutes, sometimes longer depending on the lot, but it's kind of all done and dusted very quickly. Whereas obviously if you're buying from a dealer, the process is generally it's a lot more relaxed, and you can go and test drive the car and you sit and learn all about it. And so yeah, I mean, I do think it's sort of car dependent really as to the best route.
Yep. And having gone solo with your own business a number of years ago, you've sold some fantastic cars, many of which I've definitely pined over. Is there a particular car you've handled that has stood out for you, and why?
There's a number of cars, but I would say most recently, I mean, I've been very fortunate that since I started the business, I've been able to get some really special stuff. And my ethos is that I only deal in cars that I'd want to own myself. Sadly, I can't afford, very few of the cars that I sell on consignment are far beyond my budget, but I'm fortunate that I still get to enjoy them and get to be around them. So I would say there's 2 standout cars really for me this year. The first car was the 1927 Amilcar C6, which was a car that I'd known since I was a kid. It belonged to a chap called Bernard Harding, who'd had it since 1962. My dad had known him for over 40 years, and he sadly passed away. He was 95 years old, but I was able to get the car consigned by his estate, and that was a great privilege to sell that, because that was one of 6 C6 Amilcars that was sold in the UK, and it was a huge history car at Brooklands. I mean, it raced at Brooklands from 27 right up until the outbreak of the war. So it was, I think it had over 50 races held at Brooklands on its competition career, and that was a really special thing. The second car would be undoubtedly the BMW M1 Pro car that won the inaugural Pro Car Championship with Niki Lauda. So I sold that car last year. In my opinion, I think that's probably is the most important BMW M1, because obviously the Pro Car Championship was conceived and this car was entered by Project 4 Racing, which was Ron Dennis. And Lauda was the chosen driver, and in the first season he won the championship outright with this car, and it then went in on the next season, which was 1980. It was raced by Hans Stuck, and it came 3rd overall in that season, and then it was sold to Steve O'Rourke of Pink Floyd fame. And they raced the car for 2 years at Le Mans and the World Sports Car Championship. And so a really, really stellar history. And what was great about it was very, very original. It had never been restored. And I was asked to find the best M1 Pro car I could by one of my best customers. And, you know, the stars and the moon aligned, and we were able to get this car amazingly, like less than a week before Niki Lauda passed away. At the timing of it, like, you couldn't make it up. But I think if it had been a week later, we wouldn't have got the car. But so those two are very standout, special cars, really, you know, that I've handled recently.
Yeah, certainly them ones are my favourite BMWs, along with the CSLs.
Yeah.
And I know that we both have a shared passion for Aston Martins, and a significant chunk of your stock, although I was surprised that they didn't feature in your top two, but focus on obviously Aston Martins. Two of the most collectible eras are the 60s DB cars, obviously DB4s, DB5s, and DB6s, and then the 70s and 80s V8 era. At the moment, the six-cylinder DB cars are at a significant premium price-wise against the later V8 engine cars. Do you think that's justified? And can you see a narrowing of the gap in the coming years?
Is it justified? Is a question that's kind of it's a subjective question. I think that DBs are likely to always be worth more than V8s, but there are certain V8s which will undoubtedly become more and more valuable as time passes on. So, you know, probably the most obvious one would be the V8 Vantage X-Pack. So, you know, absolute last of the line. I think there are 137 X-Pack Vantage coupes that were made. Those cars are considered to be the holy grail of V8s. And then you've obviously got the Prince of Wales Vantage Volanti. So again, I think there's 27 of those. Very special cars. In fact, they're already, you know, the prices of those are already, you know, pretty much in line with most of the DBs. I think it depends on the cars themselves as well. So what you have to bear in mind is that because DBs have always been more valuable than V8s, people have generally spent more money on them over the years. You know, there was a time, you know, 20 years ago, you could buy early V8s and DBSs. They really had very little value at all. You know, we have, sadly he's no longer with us, but we had a very close family friend called Vic Bass, and he was one of the very first Aston specialists, and he was based in Battersea under the arches at Queen's Circus. And I used to go there all the time with my dad as a kid, and he just had DBSs like outside. They weren't even covered. He just literally, they were sat, and in fact, they break them for parts. You know, today you would never do that. So the prices have evolved, obviously, with them. And I think it comes down to best of breed examples, really. I think the best V8s will always continue to rise in value. And it depends on the rarity. I mean, obviously the Vantages are the most desirable, really. You know, it's all down to condition. I mean, a fully restored car or a super original car is always going to be very desirable. So, yeah, I think they're good news. And certainly what won't harm them is the fact that they're, you know, the next Bond film has got Daniel Craig driving a V8. That's certainly going to widen their appeal to a younger audience, which I think is that's certainly going to help them longer term too. So, I mean, they're quite different cars, as you know, Charles. I mean, you spend a lot of time behind the wheel of both of them, and you know, they do have quite different driving characteristics.
Yeah, absolutely. And then moving on a few areas, as you know, I love my historic racing, and some of the cars that have always caught my eye, and indeed I see you've got one in stock at the moment, are the more modern racing Astons, the DBR9s and the DBRS9s. What are your thoughts on them, and do you think they could, in time, become the modern equivalent of a DB4 GT?
In some respects, yes. I mean, obviously, the thing with, you know, it's a tricky comparison because obviously a GT you can use on the road, whereas you cannot use an RS9 or a DBR9 on the road. But yeah, I mean, if you're looking in terms of production figures, there are 18 DBR9s and there are 26 DBRS9s. So in terms of rarity, they're far rarer than a DB4 GT. And in fact, you know, a DBR9 is rarer than a DB4 Zagato. But they're a different sort of car. DBR9s are eligible for more today because they're a GT1 car, but they're also a lot more money to buy and they cost a lot more to maintain. They're a lot more involved to run a DBR9 than a DBRS9. DBRS9s, I think, represent super value at the moment. I mean, we have the '06 British GT Championship winning car. I'm asking £350,000 for that, and that's, it's a championship winning factory competition Aston Martin racing car for not much more than a new DBS. I mean, that I think is a good, that is a special car which undoubtedly in years to come will be worth more, and equally it will become more eligible as well as it becomes more historic. So yeah, I think they're pretty good news. It's harder to say on the more modern stuff than that, because I think the R9 and the RS9 are already classic in their status. I mean, there's obviously a lot of other competition variants of more modern Astons, and kind of hard to know really what happens to the values of those over time. But I do think the R9 and the RS9 are kind of stand out in Aston's racing history, and they will be considered so in the future.
Yep, I agree. And I look forward to one day hopefully having a DBRS9 or a DBR9. I think they're fantastic.
Well, you know where to come, Charles.
Yeah, I certainly do, Dylan. And then over the last few years, your companies like Aston Martin, they've been producing what I guess we can call as modern reconstructions. So Aston have done the DB4 GT, and then more recently they've done the DB4 GT Zagatos. What do you think about these modern reconstructions?
It's a funny one, really. I mean, let's kind of wind the clock back a bit. For many years, people have taken Astons and modified them and evolved them. I mean, if you look at the DB4 lightweight racing cars, for instance, I mean, they were heavily modified, but they were very they were very serious racing cars when they were eligible. And I mean, I'm sure in the same grids that your father raced his old car, and they're awesome things. I think there's a time and a place for everything, and I don't necessarily have a problem with continuation cars, but I do think that their pricing on this stuff is ridiculous, really. I mean, I think they're doing a series of Bond DB5s, and they're like £3 million each. Well, I don't get that. I mean, you can buy the best DB5 in the world. Let's say if you had £1 million, you could buy the best right-hand drive DB5 in the world today for that. Why would you pay, another two to have a car which is brand new and has got some gadgets fitted? I mean, it certainly wouldn't cost you £2 million to fit the gadgets into the car you could buy for £1 million. So I don't really get the pricing on it. Some people are, really anti continuations. I understand the ethos behind it. I think that raising awareness for the heritage of the company is a good thing, but it can also be damaging as well. I think it comes down to how often they do it. I don't have a problem with the GT and the GT Zagato continuations. I think the Bond DB5s are a bit unnecessary, but it's fine. It's like I said, it's a time and a place.
And I guess over the last few years, there's been a bit of a correction in classic car prices generally. Then there's Brexit, then there's a dreaded coronavirus. What's your take on the classic car market at the moment?
I think it depends on what kind of cars you're offering. It does seem at the minute, cars that are sub 100,000 and maybe even sub 50,000. I think that side of the market seems to be on fire. People who I know who did and that sort of stuff literally can't get enough cars. And I think probably a combination of the fact that everyone's been locked away for 2 months and the sun's shining, and there's this sort of sense of freedom. And those cars in that price bracket are generally quite attainable for most people. On the higher value cars, I think the market's fairly similar to how it's been for a few months. I mean, I did actually, at the start of the coronavirus outbreak, when at the beginning of lockdown, I sold a DB5 convertible in first or second week, which rang me up and he said, "Look, I'm bored. I really fancy one of these. Can you find me a car?" So we did that, and I did sell a couple of other cars during the lockdown, and there is certainly plenty of interest across the board with people wanting collectible cars. I think the challenge at the moment for a business like mine, which is consignment based, is to try and get the cars consigned at the right level and manage expectations of the buyers and sellers. There does seem to be, from the buyer's point of view, everybody's, it really does want to get a good deal today, and I can understand that. And equally, there's, sellers are, in some instances, being open to offers. There are some people who still believe their cars are worth the same as what they paid for them in 2016, and so obviously that that doesn't work. But I think it goes down. It's sort of the same old story, really. The best types of the best cars will always be worth, will always be worth a premium, and they'll be saleable. And it's the also rans or the cars that have got question marks, so they're always the hardest ones to sell. But everything has a price, so it's purely down to getting the pricing right.
Yep. And before we go to our last few quick fire questions, I was wondering if we could tease out any good stories from your progression through the automotive world.
I'm not sure it would be a good idea for me to share too many of my stories with you, Charles. There's loads of stuff. I mean, I've been very lucky to have worked on the east coast of America as well as all across Europe as well. And we had some quite good times in America with a buddy of mine, Hugh Angle. We both worked at Auto Sport Designs in New York State, and we did a couple of great events actually. I did the Copper State 1000 rally with Tom Vopodopoulous, who owns Auto Sport Designs in his Ferrari Daytona, and that was pretty special. I mean, we were blasting through the Arizona desert, speeds which I'm not going to say on this interview, but that was a pretty special moment with the sun beating down and the Rolling Stones on. That was quite something. And Hugh and I did a rally in New England in a V8 Vantage, which we got stopped a number of times by the local state troopers with it. In the end, that was quite an expensive rally in the end. But there's lots of stuff. I mean, I'm very lucky as well to have worked with the people I've worked. I've built loads of good friendships and loads of good relationships. And, throughout my career, a few cynical car dealers will say, "Oh, you can't keep a job down. You've had too many jobs." But the reality of it is I think it's all about relationships, and all of the places I've worked in the past that still exist. Obviously, there's two of them that don't now, but I still do regular business and maintain good relations, and that's what it's about. This whole industry is very much a relationship based industry, and if you get good relationships with everyone, you can get stuff done. And I enjoy working with other people. So there's too many stories to mention.
Yeah, we have to tell me some of the less PG ones another time.
When we're not recording, Charles, I think that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And then to end with some quick fire questions. So, favorite classic Aston Martin?
I'm going to be biased. DB5 convertible and our car in particular. Yeah.
Yeah, and then favorite more modern Aston?
V12 Vantage. Had one myself, fantastic car, superb value for money today. Really regret selling mine. They are, in my opinion, they have the heart and soul of what Aston are about, and they're great fun. I know you're a big fan as well. They're cool things.
And that might answer my next question. Best and worst cars ever owned?
Ooh, that is not an easy one because they're good and bad for different reasons. Overall, I think the V12 Vantage as a sports car was probably one of the best sports cars I've ever owned to date. And the worst car, probably my first classic car, which was a 1971 Alpha 1750 Spider, which literally broke down everywhere I went in it. It was very cool. It was pine green, and I bought it off our next door neighbour who'd had it for 20 years, but it was the most unreliable car. The roof leaked. It never got where I wanted to go, but it was fun. It was fun learning about it in the process.
I can definitely sympathise with that. I've still got my 1975 GT Junior Alpha, which I had got when I was 17, and I can tell you I spent a fair few hours on the side of roads or on the back of a pickup truck or a recovery truck with that car. But I guess that's the joy of owning a classic Alpha. And last question: money no object, free car garage.
Oh, that is a tricky one. Okay, right. I'm going to say I would have an MG K3. That's a pre-war car. I would have a DB4 Zagato as a 60s car. And I'd have, this is a tricky one, maybe an Aston 177 as the modern. Yeah, that would be. There you go. That's my three.
Yep, good choice. Which colour for the 177?
Black, definitely. I sold a black one last year, and it just that car in black looks like the Batmobile. I've never seen a car that's got so much presence as that, and it literally, to me, that would be. I know that people ordered them in quite outlandish colours, but there's something quite cool about having a car like that in a sort of subtle colour, and it just works really well.
Brilliant. Dylan, thank you so much for the time. That's been really interesting. And yeah, absolutely excellent. And hopefully we'll catch up soon.
Thank you, Charles. Really appreciate the invite. And yes, all the best. Cheers.